The second segment is about energy for the world economy. And this is really basically is the conversation on the demand from China, India, and Brazil for energy, and at the same time, the demand from the West for China, India, and Brazil to lower their carbon footprint, lower their carbon emission. And basically, this comes down to the idea that now that these countries are emerging 200 years after the industrialization that's happened in the West, is it fair to ask them to do that? And then while you have in the West, you have this conversation, you have all these subsidies on renewable energies and clean energy. It really feels like there's two parts of this world and they're in very different mindsets. Michael, what do you think about that?
Well, it's a classic debate between history and modernity, if you like, that which has been going on since the days of the debate over the Amazonian rainforests, and Brazil being pressed to stop logging by countries like Britain, which cut down all its forests, or most of them, hundreds of years ago. And of course there is a hypocrisy in that. Do as we say, not as we do. Or
but can the world afford it?
Well, that's the other side of the equation, that whatever the history and whatever the power of those arguments about Western hypocrisy, we are where we are, and the evidence is very substantial that there is significant human-induced climate change going on, even if there are disagreements on the details and some of the projections are rather uncertain. So no, the world can't afford to ignore that. I think that clearly a quid pro quo of action by emerging economies has to be much tougher action by the West, and in particular the United States, and they need to show much more appetite and will to make those changes and reduce their own consumption than they have done already. And of course the fear is that with the financial crisis preoccupying everybody, that this will become much less of a focus, and that any emissions reductions might be accidental as a result of decreased industrial activity and decreased demand, without making any of the fundamental changes that are really needed to reduce the world's carbon emissions in the longer term.
I think that's a false dichotomy for me, this idea between the developed and the developing world. I mean, firstly, because of the diversity in the developing world. I mean, for example, the UAE, has no commitments on climate change under the Kyoto Protocol, because it was considered a developing country in 1990. Now, difficult to maintain that now. To have a basket of countries which includes the UAE, China and Burkina Faso, obviously just completely different situations. So I think that there's a false dichotomy there between, the West, because when you come to climate policy, we shouldn't get this idea that the West is doing a kind of a decent job on climate policy and China and India and so on are not, because the West is not doing a very good job on climate policy. Actually, China is doing quite a bit more than you would expect, and China has a lot of technology development. World's leading wind power manufacturer, one of the world's leading solar power manufacturers. So China, I think, and driven very much by self-interest. However, you have arguments about a global climate policy and a global climate treaty. China has very strong self-interest, firstly in avoiding dangerous climate change, which will hit China very badly, which will hit India badly, which will hit some of the Middle Eastern countries very badly. If we look at Yemen, for example, or we look at Iraq or going a bit further afield, Pakistan, all very vulnerable to climate change. But then China has very strong energy security reasons to get its climate policy right. So, there is no way, if Chinese growth in oil demand continues as it is until 2030, it'll be consuming the world's entire oil production. Now, obviously that's not going to happen. But how is it not going to happen? It's not going to happen by China developing and deploying technologies that replace oil or are more efficient, or in some way get around that energy security problem. So China has got a big climate issue, but it's also got a big energy security issue. And I guess, fortunately for us, I think the solutions to those has a lot of overlap.
Okay. Yeah, I think, when you look at China, if you look at the growth in cars on the road, the ratio, if you compare it with the United States, I think it's whatever it is, the numbers are quite divergent. And so one of the problems is that you can't really find an alternative for transport fuel for oil. So that demand is going to continue. You're not going to tell the Chinese not to buy cars. India has changed a little bit. They've diversified. They now use CNG in their public transport. So you can actually breathe in New Delhi when you go there, which you couldn't do. And here, our guests from MIT and the Sorbonne who were late coming. Was it you? Okay, so you were stuck because there was an accident, because it's so cheap here to fill up your car and then drive like a lunatic down the Sheikh Zayed Road or the Sheikh Nasser, that we have waste. I mean...
So are you making the theory, are you formulating a theory that if oil was more expensive, people would actually drive slower?
No, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of wastage.
Right.
We waste it because it's cheap. In certain countries, Saudi Arabia, for example, it's even cheaper. Feedstock that goes to industries, air conditioning usage, and so on. And we're not really making much of an effort. So, But I think globally, everybody's energy policies, there is no ideal policy. There's nobody who's getting it right.